Tiny Sparrow helps Panda with Abscess. Minutes later, something terrible happens. The mist had not yet lifted from the valley when the silence began to feel wrong. Normally, the bamboo forest trembled with life. Chirps, rustles, the low hum of wind. But this morning it seemed to hold its breath. Under a slanted stalk of yellowing bamboo lay a panda, his great head pressed to the damp earth, breath uneven, fur matted dark near his shoulder. His name was Bao, though the forest knew him only through the slow rhythm of his life. The sound of his chewing, the soft creak of bamboo bending under his weight. But today that rhythm was gone. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked leaves and something faintly metallic, an odor that didn't belong here. The forest birds had retreated to the higher canopies except one, a tiny sparrow with a streak of russet along its head. It fluttered down, tilting its small face toward the still giant. Bao exhaled weakly. A low groan left his body, not a cry but a weary sound of surrender. His left shoulder was swollen, the fur discolored. Beneath it, hidden from sight, an abscess had formed from a small thorn wound that had gone unnoticed for days. Infection had set in quietly like a thief. The sparrow landed near his paw, chirping once, soft, uncertain. The panda's ear twitched, a faint acknowledgement of life. The bird hopped closer, pecking gently at the damp patch where fluid had begun to seep. It wasn't aid born of reason, only instinct, curiosity. The fragile link that life often forges between strangers. A light drizzle began to fall again, whispering over leaves and fur. Far away, a forest ranger named May was making her morning patrol, checking the feeding sites where injured animals sometimes wandered for help. Through the mist, she saw no movement, only the broken curve of bamboo ahead. Then she heard it, a faint cough, deep and ragged. May froze. Pandas rarely made that sound unless something was wrong. She moved carefully, her boots sinking into wet moss. And there he was, Bao, the solitary male often seen from afar, now lying helpless, his black and white fur streaked with mud. The sparrow didn't fly away. It stayed, balanced on his back, its feathers puffed against the cold. May crouched low. "Easy, friend," she whispered, her voice barely touching the air. Bao's eyes opened just enough to meet her presence. He didn't resist when she approached, didn't move when she reached for the radio at her belt. She knew infection when she saw it. The abscess had ruptured from within, spreading heat through his body. In the drizzle, as she called for the rescue team, the sparrow fluttered up to a nearby branch. Watching the two below, the woman and the fading giant, the forest seemed to listen, the sound of rainfall filling every pause. When the team arrived with their quiet efficiency, Me stayed beside Bao's head, murmuring words that were more comfort than instruction. The sparrow's chirp echoed once more, faint but clear, before disappearing into the wet sky. Bao's breathing steadied slightly under the careful hands of the rescuers, the pain eased by a tranquilizer's promise. The forest exhaled with him. No one noticed the sparrow land again, just beyond the clearing, its tiny claws gripping a low branch, watching the stretcher lift the panda from the earth. For a heartbeat, the two creatures, one small enough to vanish in the rain, one large enough to command a forest, shared the same fragile quiet. But beneath that calm, something unseen had already begun to stir, something that would soon turn the forest's peace into a moment of heartbreak no one could have expected. By noon, the forest was no longer quiet, it was waiting. The storm had gathered above the valley like an ancient spirit, its breath cold and unkind. Wind swayed the bamboo groves, bending them low until rain spilled from their leaves like tears. Inside the rescue outpost, Bao lay upon a wooden platform covered in burlap and straw. The air smelled of antiseptic and wet earth. His great body barely stirred, chest rising in slow, shallow waves. The abscess on his shoulder had been cleaned and drained, the fever managed with cooling cloths and soft murmurs. May knelt beside him, checking the slow drip of saline into his foreleg. She had worked in these mountains for years, seen injuries far worse, but this one felt different. Bao wasn't just an animal under her care. He was part of this forest's pulse. When he fell ill, the silence around the valley had deepened, as if the land itself were holding him in its memory. Thunder rolled distantly. Through the open shutter, a gust swept in, carrying the scent of pine and mud. May looked up in time to see a small brown form dart in, a sparrow soaked through, trembling. It landed on the edge of the table, feathers slick against its tiny bones. "You again," May whispered. The bird tilted its head. Rain dripped from its beak. For a long moment it just stood there, unafraid of the humans, unbothered by the wires or the soft beeping of monitors. Bao stirred. A small grunt escaped him, deep and low as if recognizing the sound of the tiny creature's wings. May smiled faintly, brushing her hand against his paw. "You're not alone," she said softly. Outside, lightning cracked open the sky. The storm moved faster than anyone expected. Power flickered and the rhythmic beep faltered once before returning. The air grew heavy, pressing down with the smell of ozone and wet leaves. The sparrow fluttered once, then twice, hopping toward Bao's injured shoulder. Mi reached out instinctively but stopped when she saw the bird pecking, delicate, precise at the edge of dried fluid near the wound. It wasn't harm, it was something like care, a natural act of cleansing, the forest helping its own. And then, just as quickly, the wind roared. The door slammed open. The lights went out. For a heartbeat, everything became noise. The shatter of rain, the groan of bamboo, the sudden rush of fear. May's flashlight flared weakly. She turned it toward Bao, his eyes wide now, nostrils flaring. Breath ragged, panic. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice trembling. The sparrow fluttered up in fright, its wings brushing Bao's fur as it darted toward the rafters. A crash followed, a fallen branch breaking through the roof at the far end of the shelter. The team rushed back in with lanterns and ropes, calling out over the thunder. Bao shifted, trying to rise, his strength returning in wild, disoriented bursts. Pain drove him to move. Mi placed a steadying hand against his side, whispering, grounding him. But outside, the forest was no longer safe. The nearby creek had swollen, its current clawing at the banks. "We have to move him," one of the rangers shouted. The sparrow screamed, a sound so sharp it sliced through the rain. May turned. The bird hovered near the broken section of the roof, wings beating desperately as if warning them. And then came the sound, deep, rolling, final. A tree collapsing somewhere up the slope. The hill shuddered. Water tore through the underbrush in a sudden violent rush. May's heart froze.
"Flash flood, get him out now!"
Lanterns swung wildly as the rescuers fought the current that had begun to push through the doorway. Bao moaned, his massive body shifting under the straps. The sparrow vanished into the storm. In the chaos, it wasn't clear what was louder, the roar of water, or the sound of a heart breaking somewhere inside that shelter. By the time the flood reached the clearing, the outpost was gone beneath a veil of rain and silt. Only the bamboo, bent low under the storm, remained standing, silent witnesses to what the forest had taken back. When the rain stopped, the forest looked broken and new at once. Mist hung low and the world smelled of wet soil and silence. Where the rescue hut had stood, there was only ruin, wood, mud, and memories scattered by the storm. May searched through the debris, her hands trembling from cold and fear. Then she saw it, a patch of black and white fur under a fallen beam. "Here," she called, kneeling. Bao lay half-buried, his chest still, mud streaked across his coat. She pressed her palm to him, then felt it, faint but steady. Breath. Life. They lifted the beam away, carefully, reverently, and in the hollow of Bao's arm, tucked close against his ribs, was a small, trembling bird. The sparrow. Its wings were soaked, feathers bent, but its heart fluttered beneath May's touch. He had shielded it through the storm. Somehow in his pain and panic, the great panda had curled around a creature smaller than a leaf. No one spoke. The only sound was the forest beginning to breathe again. Hours passed. The team cleaned Bao's wound once more and kept him warm. The sparrow rested in a cloth-lined box beside the lantern, tiny and alive. By afternoon, sunlight began to spill through the fog, silvering the bamboo. When Bao finally opened his eyes, he turned his head toward the small sound, a weak chirp, no louder than a sigh. His gaze softened. May smiled through tears. "You both made it," she whispered. Later, when the floodwaters receded, she carried the sparrow to the forest edge. It hesitated for a moment, then took flight, vanishing into the light above the bamboo. Bao watched as it went. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the last trace of its song. On the muddy ground where they had lain, a single feather drifted down beside the imprint of his paw, one light as air, the other deep and lasting. Together, They told the story the forest would remember long after the noise had gone, that even in nature's wildest hours, kindness survives.